Hello everyone. Today I'm Chad Zinski, and we're going to talk about my processor, the Tsunami 5000. So, just an overview of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the Tsunami 5000, and then we're going to go into its architecture, some of the enhanced instructions, future enhancements, and any additional discussion. So about the Tsunami 5000, it's named, it's got its name from, of course, the ocean tsunamis. They are powerful, majestic, and that's what we're going for with our processor. It's designed using the Xilinx tools. It was written in Verilog HDL. So some details about the processor. It does follow the MIPS ISA. It's a RISC-based. It means each instruction is going to be one word. These words are 32 bits wide. Has a Harvard memory organization. Meaning there's a separate data and instruction memory. This is great because we can read and access both of them independent of each other. It is also in big endian format. There are 32 registers in the register file. Each of these are 32 bits wide. There are a couple of special registers like R0, the stack pointer, and return address. All the other ones are available to the user. And there is I/O interface, which is great. You can talk to any input-output device, and there's also interrupt service routines. So that we don't have to poll for any sort of input-output. That is all handled between the device and the CPU.
Chad, can you clarify your addressable space? It says 1K by 32. That would be a really small addressable space. So that must be for your simulation only, right?
Yes.
So what's your actual addressable memory?
The actual addressable would be 4 million memory addresses. This was just for the simulation.
How big's your address bus?
It's 32 bits wide.
So 4 gig, huh?
Or 4 gigs, yes. Right. So moving on to the data types that are supported by the Tsunami 5000. So we have your regular integer types, which are included in the baseline MIPS architecture. These can be signed or unsigned depending on the operation. With 32 bits, you get 4 billion unique values. So you either go 0 to 4 billion unsigned, or negative 2K to positive 2K signed. The Tsunami 5000 fully supports IEEE floating point operations and data types. We'll get into that a little bit more, but this is the basic format right here. Single precision, so that's 32 bits. We have a sign bit, an exponent field, and a mantissa field, and we'll talk about that more in just a bit. Lastly, there is a 2D integer vector data type. This splits the 32-bit register into the upper 16 and lower 16 bits will each represent a unique integer value. This can be used to represent XY coordinates in the coordinate plane, and there's a couple operations that are that go along with that. So addressing modes. So a couple different kinds. We have immediate addressing, so that's going to be used for jumps, where the address we want to jump to is provided with the instruction. We have PC with immediate offset, so that's going to be used for branches, where the immediate provided in the instruction is added to the PC as an offset. Register direct is going to be used for most operations, most arithmetic operations, as well as shifts, where the address is the register specified. We also have a register indirect, where the address we are concerned with is not the register, but the value inside of the register. This is currently used for jump register instruction. And lastly, we have register indirect with immediate offset, and this is used for load words, store words, and reading and writing to the I/O. Similar to the PC with immediate offset, except the register value is going to be used as the base. So there's 4 types of instruction formats. 3 of these are native to the MIPS processor, ISA. We have R types, I types, J types, and E types. The R types, you can see here, support 3 register fields and a shift amount field, as well as the opcode and function fields. The opcode will always be 0 for R types. That's how we know that it will be an R type, as opposed to an I type, where there are only 2 register fields and a 16-bit immediate, and J types, where we have an opcode and a 26-bit immediate. The E-type instruction is pretty similar to the R-type. The only real difference is the opcode. It will always be 1F as opposed to 0. This tells us that we have an enhanced instruction. Currently, this field right here, bits 6 through 10, are not used, so that's definitely something that can be used in the future for additional support. All right, so yeah, so that's basically the overview. So let's get into the architecture. So here is a top-level diagram. Basically have the CPU unit up here on top with the data memory and the I/O module. So just looking at it, you can see that you have your data buses here interfacing with the CPU and the memory modules. They both share the same address and data bus, but have their own separate data back into the CPU. So you can be reading from both of them separately. You can see the control signals here. You have chip select, read write selects for both I/O and data memory. So we assert these depending on if we want to read write or deassert them if we are not using them. Over here you have our last couple signals, which are the interrupt and interrupt acknowledge. So these follow a handshake protocol where I/O device will raise interrupt when he's wants to use the CPU. The next part of the handshake is the CPU will raise acknowledge, meaning that he has acknowledged the interrupt. Following that, the device, once he sees that his interrupt is acknowledged, he'll then stop asserting his interrupt. And lastly, CPU, when he's done taking care of the interrupt, will deassert acknowledge to complete the process. So inside the CPU, we see we have our instruction unit, our control unit, and our execution unit. And we'll look at those a little closer right now. Or actually, before we do, well, yeah. So we're looking at them. So this is how the 3 of them kind of interact with each other. You can see the control unit controls a lot of signals, so that's it is aptly named. So it has a lot of the control signals, and basically it's going to read in the IR the instruction from the instruction unit, and it's going to, so once it decodes that, it's going to set all these control fields, which will be sent to the execution unit to then execute on the data through the data path. A couple other signals to point out over here are our memory and I/O ins and outs. Those will be coming in and out of the execution unit. You can see that the execution unit also has a couple signals to the instruction unit, mainly the PC and sign extended of the instruction. So now looking at the instruction unit, pretty basic unit here. We got 2 32-bit registers and a register file. Basically the PC is going to hold our place in the program. We can load that. That's going to come in on PCN, which comes from the execution unit. So the PC will will be the address to our instruction memory, which will then put out the instruction to the instruction register. And then once that gets loaded in, it gets sent out to the execution unit to perform the instruction. We also have our assign extend 16, and the PC is also going out to the execution unit. So now looking at the execution unit, I got a couple more things going on, but nothing too crazy. So we see the IR here, we just saw. It's going to come in and basically get muxed in with a couple other fields to be either the S&T address, which are going to be our two operands for the whatever operation we're doing. So we're going to read those out of the register file into our RS and RT registers. These may or may not be fed into the ALU depending on our mux signals here. So we could, for each operand, we actually have a choice of 4 or 5 different inputs, just depending on what we're trying to do. So sometimes we're going to take these registers, sometimes we might use the PC or the IR or even one of our outputs of a previous operation that will kind of swing back around. So they're going to go through the ALU and then going to be loaded into one of these registers. We have a register ALU out just for our basic operations. We have an ALU high and low for our multiply and divide operations, and an ALU floating point for our floating point operations. We also have our flags register down here, and these are worth noting. We have our MDR, IDR, so these are actually where any data coming in from memory or I/O are going to be clocked into these registers right here, and then from there they can go be written to the register file. You see a couple output signals here, like PC out, ALU out, and data out. So those are going to be interfaced with the other units that we're talking about. Alright, so that's basically the architecture. So now let's talk about some of the enhancements that this Tsunomic 5000 has on top of the MIPS ISA. So definitely one of the key points is the IEEE floating point data type. Right now there's currently 5 operations, or actually 6, that take advantage of this. We can add floating point numbers and subtract floating point numbers, as you'd expect. We have a division 2 floating point operation. So the regular MIPS division will store the results as a 32-bit number, and the remainder is a separate 32-bit number. So what division 2 floating point will do is it will divide 2 integers, but it will produce a 32-bit floating point result instead of having a whole number and a remainder value separate. We'll talk about that very shortly. We also have a round floating point and a floating point to int. These are very similar instructions. They're both going to convert a floating point back to an integer. Round floating point is kind of what you expect. It's going to round it to the nearest integer. And floating point to int is going to actually truncate it. So I have an example here. If you have the number 42.7, that's going to get rounded up to 43 if you were to round it. But if you were to just type, you just want to convert it straight to int, it's actually just going to chop off everything after the decimal point. So that would actually become 42 as an integer. As mentioned earlier, there's a 2D vector, integer vectors. So we can add these, subtract these. We can actually calculate the distance between them as if they are XY coordinates. That would be the Euclidean distance, just basically a straight line between them. And we also calculate the slope, so that would be the change in the second value relative to the change in the first value. And lastly, in terms of our enhanced instructions, we can perform square root operation. Currently, we can only square root integer values, and we produce a floating point, but a square rooting floating point values is not too far off. Alright, so let's talk about the floating point data type. So before we dive into the EEE format, just wanted to just kind of talk about binary fractional values in general first. So we're definitely familiar with the whole number side of the spectrum. You know, each bit is just the next power of 2, so we have 1, 2, 4, 8, and so on. And the right side is really not much different. You actually just go into negative exponents. So you have 1 over 2, 1 over 4, 1 over 8, or half, a quarter, an eighth, and so on. So, so that's basically all that's going on in terms of binary fractional values. So I chose a number conveniently 4.625. If you were to break that down, you'd see that it's actually 4 plus a half plus an eighth. You know, the half bit is just the one right after the decimal, and the eighth bit is the third one after decimal. So you see, if we wanted to represent that in binary, we have our 4 over here to the left, and then you know, we have our half bit and our eighth bit, and that's going to be 4.2. That's basically 5/8, another way of saying that, or 0.625. You know, a lot of different ways to kind of express that value. So now we kind of understand how that works. IEEE format is essentially the scientific notation of binary decimals. So really, if we wanted to put this number in IEEE, we would just move this decimal place over twice. You kind of you want to just move it either left or right until you have this right here. So you have a leading 1, and then just everything after that. And depending on how many times you move the decimal, that's going to be your exponent field. So in this case, we had to move it over left twice. So that's like shifting left twice, which is also like multiplying by 2 twice. So that's why we have this 2 to the second power. See, kind of another way to look at it in terms of these fields, you have your sign bit right here. So is this going to be a 1 or 0, positive, negative, times 1 point, your 23-bit mantissa field here, and that's going to be multiplied by 2 to the e. It's actually not going to be directly this field. This is an offset, so you're actually going to subtract this value by 127. Just part of the IEEE format. So yeah, so that's basically it. So let's look at how we actually do this. So yeah, so let's take an example here. We have 37 divided by 8. So if we were to do that on the MIPS, we would get, so 8 goes into 37 4 times with a remainder of 5, right? So if we were to do that on MIPS, we would get a 4 in one register and a 5 in the other register. Another way to represent this as a mixed number is 4 and 5/8. So, so the 4 we're great at, but we need to represent 5/8 as, you know, in binary somehow. So let's do an example. Here's the code. We're going to do an example, and then we can look at the code if we have time here. So this is basically, so how I modeled the code though, is basically after long division by hand, really. So yeah, let's look at it. So, you know, remember grade school, doing long division. It's basically what we're going to do here. We have our 5 and our 8. So we're going to do, see how many times 8 goes into 5, which is going to be less than 1 time, right? So let's see what happens. So right now we try to put 8 into 5 here. It's not going to fit. So we need to add another 0 over there. So we're going to do that. Now we're like, all right. You know, this can go into there, it can go in 1 time. So we're going to put a 1 up there, and if, remember your long division, we then multiply this 1 times our 8 and subtract it out like that, and we get left with a 2. So we're like, okay, so now we try to divide these two. And we're basically going to repeat this process until it terminates. It won't always, right? There's some irrational numbers, they won't terminate, so we just do it, since our mantissa field's 23 bits, we'll carry it out for 23 bits until we're either done or we're not. But anyway, so we're gonna have 10, and we're like, oh, that doesn't fit. So we need to drop down another 0, which means we put a 0 up here. It still doesn't fit, so we need another 0 and drop it down. And now we're like, oh yes, this can divide into here. So we put a 1 up here, multiply it back down, subtract it out, and we get a 0, so that's great. It terminated after 3 decimal places. How convenient. But yeah, so we're left here with 0.101, which is actually the number we used in the last one. This is 4.625. You can also see that if you were to ignore the decimal place, that this would look like a 5. And if you remember the half, quarter, and eighths place, so you have 5/8 is kind of what you're looking at here. But yeah, so that's actually synthesizable in hardware. Basically just doing an algorithm that kind of replicates this long division process of checking if you can divide. If you can, you put a 1 as that bit. If you can't, you put a 0 and you shift left in another 0, kind of as we just did. So that's how that works. So that's how we'll get our binary fraction, but we still need one more step to actually get it into IEEE format. So to do that, that first part was actually the hard part, I'd say. Now we really just need to find out where our first 1 is, and then what our exponent value of these are. How many times we have to shift our decimal place so that it is right behind the leading 1. So you see we have our 4.625 here. We need to shift it over twice, and that's really all we got to do to find that our exponent will be 2, and then just everything after that we're just going to throw into the mantissa field. So how to do this in terms of the code? Kind of just line up our whole part and fraction part here, and just shift it left until we see our first 1. And then once we see our first 1, we'll just shift 1 more time, and that what we have there will be our mantissa. And we know how many times we shifted to get that, so that's how we can calculate our exponent field. And then the sign bit is just going to be, if the operands are the same or separate signs, that's how we're going to get our sign bit. And yeah, so that's how it is. That's how we did it here. See if you want, look in the code. You got some shifts, and basically mostly just kind of shifting and comparing values, and looping through that as many times as we need. So yeah, so the other enhancement was the 2D integer vector.
Can I stop you just for a second? So it's like, those were great, showing how you make the number. Do you have any slides that show us like how you add?
I really wanted to. I thought that would kind of push me over the time.
Okay.
I could talk about it though briefly. So we kind of reversed that last step where we are shifting the decimal. So we actually, if we are adding 2 floating points, say one of them has an exponent value of 2 and the other one has an exponent value of 7, we always want to shift up to the bigger number, because we don't want to lose if we're going to lose precision, we want to lose precision on the lower end.
Right.
So so we're going to basically shift them so that they have the same exponent, and then we can just do a regular add, and then kind of shift it back if we need to. Most of the time, unless there's some sort of carryover, the exponent of the result will be the same. Sometimes it might go up or down by 1 if there's a carry.
But basically, exponents have to be the same, then you can just add or subtract the mantissas.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very easy, once you've got your numbers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you just shift, kind of get the exponents the same, add them, and then kind of reshift if you need to.
How about a quick, how do you do multiply, divide, quickly?
That's not implemented,
Okay.
but if I would say, I think you would add the exponents.
Yeah, add and subtract the exponents.
Just multiply the mantissas.
Yeah.
So that's something we can definitely add in the future. There wasn't, time was the biggest constraint, so, you know, we did what we could.
Yeah, good, thanks.
Yeah. So the 2D integer vector data type, like I said earlier, it's basically you're going to split the register in half, 16 bits and 16 bits. So these will be two unique integer fields. So when you do our adds and subtracts, this won't carry over into the next field. They're going to be treated as their own separate values. Flags do get set. We'll actually set the carry flag if there's an overflow in the vector1 field, and we'll set the overflow if there's an overflow in the vector2 field. These aren't actually used by any operations, but they could definitely be supported in the future. So I mentioned there's a slope operation. So this is gonna basically find the difference in vector2 and divide that by the delta of vector1. And that's basically how you get slope. It's going to be change in vector2 relative to change in vector1. And we can also do the distance between them. I have this here. I just want to point out this is actually the longest operation in ISA. It's actually not even counting fetch, decode, and writing it back. It's going to have 4 clocks just to execute this. So we need to subtract the x via each field. Then we need to square them, and then we need to add those two results, and then we need to square root that result. So we have to do each of those operations on their own clock. So that operation will be the longest one. And we'll actually look at how the square root is performed right now, I believe. All right, yeah, so square root, this is actually definitely a lot more difficult than I thought it was going to be when I set out to do this. But we got it. Yeah, so I think this way, I have an example. I chose the number 47. No reason really. So as we know, if we square root a number, it's either going to be a perfect square or it's going to be an irrational number. So none of these square roots are going to actually terminate. So in terms of the division that we saw the first time, if it's not a perfect square, you're basically going to have full 32-bit of just kind of precision of, and it's not really going to terminate. So you're not going to get an exact value as they are irrational numbers, but you'll get a very good approximation. So let's look at how we would take the square root of 47 in binary. Yeah, so just bear with me. It's going to seem weird. I essentially followed like some guy doing it on YouTube, and yeah, so let's look at that process. So basically, we have 47 here in binary, and our square root sign. We're actually gonna we're gonna break it up by pairs of bits. So I'll put lines here. So yeah, so we're gonna look at the very first pair, and basically what we're gonna do is if it's either 1 or more, that the pair, our first bit will be a 1. If it's 0, it will be 0. So just to start, we put a 1 up here because that was more than 1, or it was 1 or more. So now we actually kind of do what we did for long division. We're actually going to take this 1, we're going to multiply it by this 1, and subtract it out of that, just the first pair of bits. We're going to do that. You can do the subtraction, all right? And then, so next, what we're going to do is we're going to take our 1. This is where things kind of get a little, yeah, you'll see. But basically, yeah, we're just going to take this 1, and we're just going to shift it left 1. So that's how we get this 1, 0 here. And then next, just like division, we're going to just drop down that next pair of bits. Or we're going to put a line here too. We're going to drop down that pair of bits. So now why we drew this line here, so we have these two numbers. We have a 1, 0 space and a 1, 1, 1. What we want to do is say, can we put a 1 here, and will it be less than this value? And yes, it will be, right? We can put a 1 here, and it will still be less than this value. So what that means is our next bit will be a 1. So we're just going to kind of keep repeating this process. So we're going to shift. Oh yeah. So now we subtract that out. We get this, and then so here in the next step we're going to just shift that 1 over 1, and repeat the process. So now we're going to drop down. We're drawing a line there, and we're going to drop down the next 2 bits. Kind of just keep doing the same thing. So we look here. We're like, can we put a 1 here? Will it be less than this? The answer this time is actually going to be no. Yeah, we can't write, even if we put a 0, it's going to still be bigger, but we only have 2 options, 1 or 0. But, so it's going to be a 0 for the next bit, and so then we don't actually subtract anything out because we are going to multiply by 0 and do that. So right now, we have a 6 here, right? So you can see, it's close to our answer. We're off, but it's 6.855 or whatever. So in order to get that fractional part, we're gonna do what we did with division and just start adding more pairs of zeros behind the decimal. And yeah, we're just gonna keep repeating this process. Really, we're gonna drop those zeros down. Can we put a 1 here? I believe we can. That means the next bit's a 1. Subtract out that value, shift that 1 over, add another pair of zeros, and we're going to keep doing this. So we would do this, as many times as it took, I guess 23 times to get to make sure we have full precision in the mantissa. I'm not going to do this 23 times, right, obviously, but I'll do it, I think we go like to 4 bits. So you can see, so remember, if we remember the bit after the decimal is the half field. So you'd expect that to be a 1, right? Because this is more than 6.5. The second bit is also a quarter. So after a quarter is 0.75, right? So you'd expect both of these to be on because it's more than 0.75. The next one is an eighth. That would be 7/8, which is a little bit more than 0.85, so that one's going to be off. But I believe the 4th one's going to be on. And so yeah, you just keep repeating this. So every bit you go out, you're going to get closer to your number. So if we only have 1 bit after decimal, we'd be at 6.5. It's kind of close, but not really. So the more bits we add, the more precise we'll be. And irrational numbers, it'll never be exact, but we'll get pretty close with the single precision. As you can see, just after 4 decimal places, we get this number here. That's going to be 6.8125. So we're getting pretty close. We're off by 4 hundredths or so. So pretty close. But yeah. So, but obviously, we would do the full process, we'd get that full field. We'd be off by a very small order. But just looking at the code, you can see, kind of just shifts and comparisons, kind of like what we did with the division. We're kind of just going to compare, is this less than that? If it is, put a 1 and then, shifts, basically. So we're just going to loop through that process a bunch of times. Yeah, that's basically what we do there. Yeah, like I said, that was definitely the most, I'd say the most challenging part of this project, the Tsunami 5000. Yeah, when I was like, I want to do square root, I was like, it can't be that hard. Definitely, I found a lot of different papers about, I don't know what you would call this. I think it's called like a restoring algorithm or something like that. A lot of different papers on it. Some were easy to follow, some were not. But what really helped me was this guy just doing it on YouTube. Basically doing this process by hand on YouTube. And so I did that like 10 times, and then I finally had a good understanding of it where I could kind of start trying to write code to kind of represent that routine. Yeah, definitely a lot of debugging went into that. Yeah. So yeah, so that's basically it. So, but future enhancements that I wanted to add, but didn't have time to do, would be 64-bit arithmetic, trig functions. These also, I was like, oh, they can't be that hard to do. You know, obviously doable. People have done it. A common way to do it is just by using a lookup table, which would just map values to the values. I didn't really want to do it that way, and I didn't really want to just like punch in a bunch of numbers to create like a lookup table. So that ended up not making the cut. Comes another thing, conditional jumps using the flags. So right now, all our jumps are either are unconditional. We do have branches which check against the flags, but we don't have any jumps that do like a jump if carry, a jump if 0, or something like that. Those wouldn't be too hard to add, but something I want to add. Pipelining is obviously ideal. It just didn't really, didn't quite have time to do that. A couple other things, small things like multiplying floating points. You know, definitely a couple other things like that, but was not able to. Yeah, that's the Tsunami 5000. Are there any questions?
So you have an MDR and an IDR. Why were those necessary? Is there like instruction that uses them?
No, they just are to load the data that we're reading in out of the memory and the I/O. So basically, it just clocks them in there, and then we can send that to the register if we want. You know, we could go straight from memory to the register file. I just kind of decided to put those registers in. I kind of saw that somewhere. I think just kind of decided to do it that way. But definitely not 100% necessary.
Okay.
I think we're out of time, but that was awesome. Very good job.
Thanks.
Yeah.